Buchwald.
Buchwald, yeah.
Buchwald is an occupational therapist and has created Wonder Kids Therapy Center, and has designed many classes that we have at Union Square Play at our Tenafly location. And we're thinking about potentially offering some services outside of Tenafly, maybe at some of our other locations. And we wanted to just introduce her to our whole community and introduce occupational therapy and all of its benefits to the community. Um, it's one of those areas that it's like, I wish I knew from the start. And I feel so strongly about bringing it to more and more families, and we all do at Union Square Play. So, yeah, Blanche, do you want to just introduce yourself and give a little bit of your background, and then we
Sure,
can start it on chatting more about
sure.
everything?
Definitely. Hi, I am Blanche Buchwald. I'm an occupational therapist. I've been practicing for over 22 years. I graduated from NYU, got my master's there, and I've been started off working in many private practices and schools, public schools, private schools, and then about 3 years ago, I opened my own practice, Wonder Kids Therapy Center, where I was able to really hone in on what I wanted occupational therapy to look like. So we have a sensory gym. We send therapists out to schools and create sensory gyms in schools so that kids are really getting quality therapy during the day. And I mean, I am very passionate about trying to make sure that um, services are accessible to everyone. We work with insurance in order to make that happen for people. And I'm also really into communication with teachers, communication with parents. I'm very, very passionate about what I do. I have 5 kids of my own, so I've also been through a lot with them. So I really understand from the parents' perspective as well.
Great. Yeah, I would say that you definitely have full circle perspective. Um,
Yes.
so getting into what OT is, I guess let's start with who could benefit from occupational therapy.
Sure. I mean, typically we see kids either like really from birth up until 12 years old. So I would say that age group is where the pediatrics are in. There are kids who get seen in high school as well, but my typically the most kids are seen from birth through 12. There is early intervention, which is up until 3 years old. So it's really, I mean, so many kids can benefit from OT. It's um, working on life skills, really. That's what it is. It's preparing children for life skills because there are things that go on in the first years of life that actually really impact their school age years as well. So meeting the milestones, the quality of the milestones, the strengths, it all kind of always goes back to, when they are young. And at that stage in life, brains are have a lot of neuroplasticity, meaning like they have a lot more availability to create connections and to change. And so therefore it's like an amazing time to really work with kids on the skills that they need help with.
Can you give an example of like what you've seen as a life or the start of a life skill that, early on when there's more of this like like
Plasticity.
flexibility? Yeah. Um, like what it could manifest as or develop as, not in a
Yeah.
fear-mongering way. Like just as an example, I think for me, when I was learning about it, that helped me really comprehend and understand why even children who don't have some, specific diagnosis could benefit from occupational therapy. And it could be something, and we'll get into this also, but just it could be something that seems a little bit more subtle or less obvious.
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting because there's like sometimes when I see kids who are, let's say, 4 or 5, and I'll ask the mom, or the dad about the milestones that and I could kind of almost guess what they're going to tell me based on what I'm seeing. So there's, if children, let's say, if babies aren't crawling on their hands and knees, specifically hands, and not really crawling for a long period of time, a lot of time they don't develop the right arches in their hands. So like you can actually tell when their hands are more flat and then their grasp isn't good. A lot of kids struggle with pencil grasp and marker grasp in school. And I can actually say like, wait, so tell me about their crawling. And I was like, okay, I kind of had a feeling that's where we were going, that they were not crawling hands and knees, or they barely crawled, or they did the army crawl. So another thing would be even rolling, and also tummy time. Like it's really important for kids to be able to cross midline. That means like being able to cross from one side of their body to the other in order to do a million activities for life, right? Especially in school. And that's really important for hand dominance. So you want kids to have one hand that they're really working with, as opposed to when they're working on one side, they're using one hand and then they don't want to cross over. So they're going to switch to the other. That would be somebody that's not crossing midline. So oftentimes I see that in babies who really struggle to roll or did not get a lot of tummy time and they were on their backs a lot, that they did not, that's interesting. Like I could see that already when they're 3 and 4 years old.
I feel like we can have like a weekly conversation because I wanted to get into the whole tummy time thing and how like crossing the midline, I would assume, is actually more when they're spending time on their back. Reaching for things, but we can do that at another time.
Yes.
Yeah, because I know I like talk a lot about how like tummy time is not so important. Like there's other ways to expose a kid or get them off their back. But anyway,
yes.
that's great.
No, I mean, they need to be on their back too. It's just that if they're only on their back and they're
Right.
not spending enough time really on their tummies and not pushing up and not reaching for toys like that on their tummies, and the rolling is really important.
More when they're holding their head up, right? Like as opposed to early on when like they can't hold their head up and it's really uncomfortable.
Even honest, I mean, tummy time is like, that's like an OT like thing, because kids used to be on their tummies all the time, and I know it's back to sleep, and of course you have to do obviously what's safe and great, but for playtime, OTs are the ones always encouraging as much as possible to get in a little bit, not for long periods of time, like you don't want the baby to be unhappy, but just to get it in there at little points throughout the day so that they're experiencing it and giving them the opportunity to work on pushing up and pushing up, working on their upper body strength.
Absolutely. And I think, that's really helpful to know some of the things that you already can kind of conclude about early development for specific instances where a child might be struggling with something later on. Like you said, holding a writing instrument, something like that, that you can already kind of assess that maybe there was something that was missed.
Yes.
Early. And in terms of like challenges, can you like that we might see, you gave a few examples, but is that more of like a global challenge? For instance, if they're having trouble holding a writing instrument, will we see that it's more than just that and they're having trouble with other, like, is it usually connected to more than just specifically?
Very good question. It's usually, and very typical, it's very often that it's not just a fine motor grasp issue. It's usually really more connected, like goes all the way back to the core, upper body strength. There's a lot that goes into being able to sit up at a desk in school and, be doing writing, doing homework, because there's the sensory piece that goes into it. There's the strengthening piece that goes into it. And then there's also the fine motor piece that goes into it. So we never just focus on one part of the body. OT is very holistic, and you're really looking at the whole child and trying to kind of like understand the pieces of why this child is having a little bit of a harder time or having some challenges.
Super helpful. And what is the process of figuring out, like, beside, like, you might see someone in a Union Square play class, that you might be like, oh, they could benefit. But what is like the more, and I'd argue that you're not like going up to people in that format.
No.
So can you give us a little bit about the process of figuring out
Yes,
who can benefit?
definitely. I mean, it either sometimes it might just come from your pediatrician, like in terms of milestones when they're young, especially like from, baby age, that type of thing. It could be at home that you're noticing that other kids are doing certain things at that stage that maybe your child isn't doing yet. And you know that by a certain point, there are certain things that they should be doing, whether it's the sitting up, the crawling, the pulling to stand. That's when they're younger. And really, I always tell moms to trust their gut. Like, I really, really am a big believer in that. Um, because that's really moms know. So I
In
was also,
addition, oh,
yeah,
sorry, I just like wanted to insert something there
yeah,
because you and I talked about how there's like these milestones, and then there's also this like real sensory component that I think is less
yes,
obvious to parents on like, oh, my child, for instance, I think we've all been there, many of us have, where a child's like, oh, I don't like the texture of this. Can you cut the tag out? And I wouldn't say all of us, like, but a lot of people might have or like a phase of like, I only want to wear dresses or things like that.
mm-hmm,
And usually we think, okay, it's a phase,
right, which it
but
might be.
yeah. So
So I guess the answer to that is if it's interfering with a child's functioning. If it's really getting in the way. I mean, if you're having to buy like a totally different wardrobe for your child without like, or tagless, seamless, that is a pretty big deal. I mean, that does get in the way of everyday life. There are the kids who will not wear short sleeves, they'll only wear long sleeves, or once they're wearing their long sleeves, they won't go to short sleeves. So those kinds of things, when you're really seeing it's impacting their everyday life. Also with like sounds, there are a lot of kids who have a lot of auditory, it's called auditory defensiveness, where they're very sensitive or hyper vigilant to noise. So it's when it's kind of really getting in the way of your everyday life, when they're constantly noticing, what's that, what was that, or fearful of the vacuum cleaner, or fearful, of the leaf blower, that kind of thing. That's, I would
what
say.
is that usually about? I mean, I'm sure there's a wide array of things, but like, how is that related to occupational therapy?
Okay. So that part of occupational therapy is really focused on the nervous system, specifically like on regulation. There's a lot of science and research that shows that um, we all do, but we're talking about children, go into almost either like a fight or flight, or freeze. There's a few different things that your sympathetic system kicks into in defensive mode if there's a perceived danger. So perceived danger might really not be dangerous, but for them, this child's perspective, it's dangerous or noxious, and that's how they're experiencing it. And therefore, they go into fight or flight mode. So you will see the fight or flight symptoms, which is, the heart rate might go up. They're starting to get, what happens in the nervous system is cortisol starts running through your system. You're starting to get more anxious, all of those types of things. So you'll see the emotional with the sensory usually goes hand in hand. It's very interesting. Like when there is a time in life when there is more anxiety, if there's more transitions going on or something that a child is struggling with, then you will see the sensory peak, and also vice versa. When the sensory is peaking, sometimes the emotional peaks, because they kind of go together.
Right. And
So
is that less likely formed the way that we were talking about some of like the milestones? Like, is that like usually about missing some sort of optimal window when they're young, the same way that you were saying?
yes and no. It could be. I mean, sometimes it could just be the way that we they are wired. It's just
Right.
genetics, but you can still work with that. Because like I said, the nervous system and the brain are very neuroplastic at that age, and you can really still make a lot of changes and help them learn how to cope with what is going on in their bodies, with what they're feeling. Um, at the same time, yes, there are certain milestones like that really will affect like how a child sees movement. Like a child who's not rolling, they're often the ones who are more fearful later on of movement, or of, they're kind of like to be in control of the movement. So if that's the vestibular system, that's how your body moves, like how you perceive how your body moves in space. So if um, certain things like that, I would say the rolling specifically is something that doesn't happen a lot while they are young. And also movement in general, like the baby getting moved in lots of different positions. You really want to develop that like body awareness and being able to experience all different planes of motion to develop the
So,
vestibular system.
so you think it's not ideal to move the baby?
No, it
Or
is.
it is. Okay.
Yeah, no, you want them to experience
Right.
all
And
different planes of motion. You want all different, you know, like a lot of times in our milestones classes, we'll be like, okay, we're gonna hold the baby up. I mean,
right.
safely. Everything needs to be very safe, but
Like, and
up
for
and
those who have
down.
experienced Dion, there's lots of crossover there that we've talked about.
Okay, okay. Yeah, it was like holding your baby and spinning, holding them on the side. You want them to experience that movement. So that is definitely something that I see later on in kids if that's something that they haven't gotten. Plus, also, honestly, the crawling, like if you're not exploring your surroundings, then you're not being exposed to certain
Right.
textures. So that is
Would
another
make
thing.
it more sensitive later when you are.
Definitely. Oh yeah, for sure. Also noise. I mean, it's interesting because a lot of like the COVID babies, I saw a lot of COVID babies who really were struggling with like new faces, new sounds, because they were so used to just being like in one environment
Right.
consistently. And their nervous systems hadn't adapted to change.
Yeah, it's so true. I think for those of us that work with young kids, we see, a different, not always, but there's a lot that, yeah, maybe there's like more of a sensitivity in terms of like bigger crowds or
Crowds.
people or, yeah. Um, I wanted to see if anyone had questions while continue to ask you questions. If anyone does, I believe you're able to write it in the chat, but actually, I'm not sure. Okay. Well, yeah, I actually don't know if they
Oh,
can.
really? There's no place for questions.
Yeah. But I have more anyway, but just wanted if people had anything specific. Um, okay, that's super helpful. And then in terms of like why a lot of people who qualify or their child is, getting OT services, can you tell us a little bit about the sensory gym component and how that's beneficial? Like if, there's getting OT services maybe at home or at a place, but is a lot of people also have the component of bringing their child to a sensory gym? Oh, good, there's.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yes, I agree. I'm a big believer in sensory gyms because it's at home when you're going into someone's house, there's only so much equipment that you could be bringing with you and have the child experience. In a sensory gym, the goal is that you're going to be having all types of suspended equipment that you could change and make obstacle courses with, all types of different things that they can explore. So the swings, I mean, all of it, the input that they are able to get, proprioceptive, which is input to joints and muscles, and then the vestibular, which is the movement. Those are key things in sensory integration, and just the quality of the session and the progress of the child is really often greatly going to improve in a sensory gym. That's just what I've seen. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, and someone had written that it changed their child's life being able to have a sensory gym. Like
Yes.
also, sometimes children you might see that they're having a hard time like in kindergarten sitting at a table or desk, that a hard time focusing. And for some of those children, having a sensory gym to really like get out a lot of pent up
Yes. I mean, so that is like,
help them. Yeah.
yes. I am in private schools where we have created sensory gyms, and we do see children there throughout the day privately who need the services through insurance. But we do that specifically in school is amazing because a lot of kids really need that sensory break. Plus, I can communicate with the teachers, and we can kind of come up with sensory strategies for them throughout the day. So it's not just that one OT time a week or 2 times a week, but that it's like throughout the day, the teacher is sensitive. Whether it's like this is a child that needs to go carry like the heavy carton to the office with the assistant, whatever it is, helping them understand what could work for this child to get them through the day so that, they're really functioning at their optimum.
And is that when people are referring to sensory processing and sensory integration, is that what that refers to?
Yes, that is what it refers to. So, I mean, the science behind sensory is that, like I told you before, like I said before, the sympathetic system kicks in, which is a lot of cortisol. That's like actually a hormone or neurotransmitter that goes through our bodies, and that causes us to be feeling that stress, fight or flight experience. We want to produce serotonin. We want to produce dopamine. Okay. So those are the calming, regulating neurotransmitters. When we do heavy work, which is proprioceptive input, heavy work means input to joints and muscles, like when, pushing something heavy, pulling something heavy, even just deep hugs, that releases serotonin into a child's system, as well as dopamine. And those are the regulating neurotransmitters. So that is what's helping that child kind of stay regulated throughout the day, keeping them from those meltdowns that they might be experiencing otherwise.
Someone asked like how old is too old? Like, is there too old for OT? Is there any?
No. I mean, it just, you have to find the practice that's, sees that age group, but there's OT for high school students, there's OT for adults. There's actually, it's like a very newer type of thing where sensory OT for adults, who might have needed it again when they were younger, and they're recognizing that now, and it's helping them as adults.
Yeah. Yeah. And yes, I want to get to that question. I
Of
just
brushing.
like I
Yeah,
think as an example, there might be those people who really don't like the big crowds and things like that, like it might not be so concrete, but I just think I'm thinking of like a few people in my life specifically that in my mind, and I'm sure Blanche, like you sometimes think like this, like I wonder if, you know, there was some help that they could, people are less likely, I think, when they're older, but it doesn't mean that they're ever too old. I think
for
someone's less
sure.
likely to like be aware, oh, I have a hard time when there's a lot of people. Like they might not understand that. They've just kind of avoided it.
Mm-hmm.
As
For
an
sure.
example.
No, I
Someone
agree.
was asking when you were talking about like the heavy movements and things like that, is that when you might use brushing?
Yes. So I don't know how familiar people are with brushing, but it's basically deep pressure therapy. That's what brushing is about. Um, Brushing is a very specific type of brush and a specific protocol. So you would really need to be trained by an OT to do it because it has to be the right input, but it's delivering deep pressure to the body, the inputs into the joints and to the muscles. And you finish with joint compressions, which is also giving direct input. And that is what's releasing the serotonin. And I mean, I'm huge believer in brushing. It has changed so many of my clients' lives. Um, they really are, it works on regulating the nervous system. That's really what you see from it. And you see the long lasting effects of it. I usually recommend for parents to do brushing to start, let's just do for 2 weeks, because it is something a parent has to do. It only takes 2 minutes, but I recommend parents do it 3 times a day. The protocol is actually every 90 minutes, but that is not practical or realistic. So I say, let's do it 3 times a day, in the morning, afternoon, and before bed for 2 weeks. And let's see how your child is at the end of 2 weeks.
Super helpful. Like I didn't really know exactly what brushing was for, even though I've worked with kids who would get OT services and get brushing. Like I didn't realize I knew that it was like sort of this like relaxing thing, but didn't understand
Why?
that nuance level of like this is releasing specific
Serotonin.
chemicals in the brain.
It's like getting deep tissue massage like
Right.
3 times a day. Imagine that.
Which I need right now.
Me too.
What are some of the long-term consequences if people don't do OT for their child? And I know that's like a very small question, but
it really depends on why your child needed the OT and they didn't receive it. I don't know. It really depends, because the OT works on, there's the fine motor piece, there's the strengthening piece, there's the coordination piece, and then there's also the regulation piece. So it depends on what needed to kind of get treated at a young age. And listen, it's never too late. You can always be working on things and creating new neural pathways in your brain. It's just noted that when you're a child, at ages like definitely 0 to 3 and then 3 to 5, that's when the most impact you're going to have.
yeah, and I'd say that as not an occupational therapist, that if longer term, it might just be that there's like limitations to certain things, or maybe more anxiety around certain things.
Definitely.
Yeah, just generally speaking. And then someone asked, can we discuss some of the swings in a therapy gym, like in a sensory gym? Like when you referred to I think you said.
Sure. And
Yeah.
also, actually, I just want to go back to your question before. I was just thinking about it. Something I tell parents a lot also is, with kids, it's almost like they start doing therapy for themselves, because kids are so active, and once they're no longer fearful, or they're getting in the activities that they're now able to suddenly do more things, it becomes almost like a good cycle, where then they're almost giving therapy to themselves because they're experiencing more. So that's also the beauty of treating in a child. You
You mean
said
that the parent is giving themselves therapy?
Say that again?
You mean that the parent it's like for the parent too? Is that what you meant?
No, I really mean that the child, through their daily life, because now they are no longer, let's say, fearful to climb something in the playground. So
Right.
now they're trying it. Oh, and now they're willing to slide. And now that I could do that, I'm going to try climbing the next thing. It kind of
They
builds.
use these like tools that you're introducing, and then they'll implement them in their like everyday life.
Exactly. And then it starts kind of, just like it's a circle.
Being
It's like,
integrated, like we
yes.
said. Yes, someone was asking about like swings. I
Yes.
think you talked about, suspending things and all that.
So there are all different types of swings. There are some that are like compression, like made out of lycra, that are meant for also giving that kind of like hugging input, bouncing, having children being able to go from side to side, all different planes of motion, up and down, front to back. Those happen to be like some of my favorite. And there's another one that we call the Superman
why
swing.
is that helpful? Like
the rainbows, that a lycra swing, sorry. Okay, so it does a lot of different things, but that material, when it's suspended, when a child is in it, it's like, think of like that thick bathing suit material. It kind of hugs you back. It's really like the Lycra it's called a compression swing. So that in itself is giving you that overall proprioceptive input to the whole body, the joints and the muscles. So being in that swing and then swinging in a linear motion, which is very calming, like you just will see a whole change. This to me goes back to when babies are in utero, like if you think about it, they are, in utero in a small space, kind of being hugged. There's constant like rhythmic movement going on. There's the sucking, there's like the swishing sound, which is also like always consistent. Those are the things that actually like regulate our nervous system, even as once we exit the womb. So some of the swings kind of almost mimic that, but they're also very fun. And there are swings that are for strengthening, that you're on your stomach. It's called the Superman swing, and you're weight bearing on your arms, and you're like holding a rope and flying back and forth, at the same time doing a puzzle, so that you're working on lots of different things at the same time.
I wonder if like people have come to you to help them with like getting rid of thumb sucking or pacifier, things like that, by implementing these other soothing mechanisms that
Yes.
a child just...
Exactly. Because when a child is sucking their thumb or using a pacifier, it is calming and regulating for them. And I wouldn't want to take that away from them if that is what is soothing at that moment for them, but it's instead kind of replacing it and teaching them other ways to self-soothe that might be more age appropriate.
Like what?
So on like even teaching them how to give themselves like those deep hugs, whether it's not replacing it with like an item, if it's like a weighted lap pad, sometimes we give kids for class, that kind of thing, or even at home when they're doing homework, a weighted lap pad. A lot of times I also just find that like through OT, even if I'm not replacing that oral fixation, it kind of just goes away.
Right, because they're getting these like releases
Exactly.
that sucking is giving them other ways.
Right. It's not necessarily just needed in that way. They're
Right.
regulated.
It's like a more global like approach to helping this child with, yeah. Someone had said that it's so helpful to learn about this, and there is a stigma around needing services, and it's why I keep coming back to OT in what I'm sharing with our community, because I do think that like anyone, including us as adults, could benefit from OT, but just that it's not this like clear cut, it's not as obvious. Like we've talked about, if a child is like walking late, you think, oh, physical therapy. If a child is talking late, you think speech therapy. Whereas OT, as we've talked about, can be milestones like that, but can also be like a sensory processing challenge or integrating, sensory comfort, so to speak,
Yeah, regulating, really overall regulating of, yeah. I mean, I hear that there is sometimes a stigma, but I feel like nowadays also it's become so much more accepted and common that, so
Absolutely.
many mainstream kids are receiving OT.
And it's why, like, even in like classes at Union Square Play and Tenafly, where you're giving these classes, like we're trying to expose children to some of the benefits of OT just in these classes that you're designing.
Because it's not just for kids who maybe are struggling, even almost. It's like it's just beneficial because it's going to help your overall growth and development. Like every child would benefit from OT. That's the bottom line. They're the kids who need it, kids who benefit from it. There's all different ways that OT would be helpful.
Well, thank you so much, Blanche. I want to be mindful of time. Oh, I think someone raised a hand. Or maybe it was accidental. But I know you mentioned that you work with insurance and you gave your information. Is there anything else you want to leave people with? We did record this, so if anyone has missed anything, you can flag us. We could send you the recording, but just on your end, Blanche, is there anything I missed?
I guess just if it is something that you are interested in, I would say the first step to work with our practice is to just send a picture of your insurance card. You can either text it or email it with your child's full name and their date of birth. And my medical biller will look into the insurance and look into your benefits. My goal is that most of my clients actually just pay a copay because I really want therapy to be accessible to everybody. So that would be the first step.
Great. Thank you so much. It helps to, explain to people that it doesn't need to be this like overwhelming, daunting process, that it could be as simple as just getting that information to you.
Yes, we take care of the
going
rest. We really take care of all that legwork and paperwork and all the insurance.
Well, thank you so, so much. Thank you to everyone who joined. And we feel lucky to have you, Blanche, working
Thank
with us.
you.
And thank you for your time to bring more knowledge of it to everyone here.
Thank you so much. It's great speaking with you.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye.